Her baby was taken as debt payment until a billionaire decided to... A young mother signs what she thinks is a simple surrogacy deal, but the moment she gives birth, everything shatters. Her baby is ripped from her arms because the agency claims the child is payment for her debt. Broken and alone, she stumbles into the arms of a mysterious billionaire, a man who has been tracking this agency for years, a man who knows their darkest secrets, and a man who sees something in her that no one else ever did. A chance to expose a hidden baby auction ring. But as they dive deeper, she realizes he's not just trying to save her child. He may be hiding a past that ties him to the very people they're fighting. And the closer they get to the truth, the more dangerous the game becomes. Now she must decide, can she trust the only person powerful enough to help her? Or is she stepping into an even bigger trap? What happens when a mother's love collides with a billionaire's secrets, and the truth could cost them everything? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Mara Johnson's hands trembled as she clutched the worn manila folder stuffed with overdue bills. The modern lobby of New Horizons surrogacy program stretched before her, all gleaming glass and polished chrome. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors where dozens of couples sat in plush chairs, their faces bright with hope and anticipation. She closed her eyes, whispering a quiet prayer. "Lord, I need a miracle. Please let this be it." The weight of exhaustion pressed down on her shoulders, a familiar companion after countless double shifts at the community clinic. The image of her grandmother's face, lined with pain but still managing a brave smile, flashed through her mind. That morning, she'd had to help her take her medication, watching as trembling hands struggled with the pill bottle they could barely afford to keep filled. "Ms. Johnson?" A crisp voice cut through her thoughts. "We're ready for you now." The representative who greeted her was the picture of corporate polish. Perfectly styled hair, immaculate suit, and a smile that seemed practiced in its warmth. Her nameplate read, "Mrs. Carter." "Please, follow me," Mrs. Carter said, leading Mara down a hallway lined with photos of smiling families. "I understand you're interested in our surrogacy program?" Mara nodded, her throat tight. "Yes, I saw your advertisement. The compensation mentioned..." They entered a small but elegant office, and Mrs. Carter gestured for her to take a seat. "You're wondering if it's really as generous as advertised?" Her smile widened. "I can assure you it is. Many of our surrogates have been able to completely transform their financial situations." Mara's fingers unconsciously tightened on the folder in her lap. Inside were notices from the power company, past due medical bills, and a final warning from her grandmother's pharmacy. "That would make such a difference," she whispered. Mrs. Carter leaned forward, her voice softening with understanding. "We help create families here, Ms. Johnson, but we also believe in taking care of the amazing women who make these miracles possible. The compensation package includes full medical coverage during the pregnancy, and the final payment would more than cover what I can see is causing you worry." She nodded toward the folder. Hope flickered in Mara's chest, fragile but persistent. "And it's safe." "Absolutely. We maintain the highest medical standards. Now, shall we look at the paperwork?" A thick stack of documents appeared on the desk. Mrs. Carter began explaining them, her words flowing quickly and smoothly, pointing out where signatures were needed. Mara tried to follow along, but the legal language made her head spin. She caught phrases like genetic material and contractual obligations, but the details blurred together. "I should probably have a lawyer look at these," Mara said hesitantly. "Of course, that's your right," Mrs. Carter replied, though her smile tightened slightly. But I should mention that this particular opportunity might not be available if we delay. We have many interested candidates." Mara thought of her grandmother's medicine, of the threatening letters from bill collectors. She picked up the pen. The medical evaluation came next. The clinic area was state-of-the-art, but something about it made Mara's skin prickle. The nurses were efficient, but oddly distant, going through their tasks with mechanical precision. No one made small talk or asked how she was feeling. When one nurse took her blood pressure, her hands were cold and impersonal against Mara's skin. "Everything looks satisfactory," the doctor announced after reviewing her results, barely glancing up from his tablet. "You'll need to start hormone treatments immediately." Mara nodded, pushing down a nagging sense of unease. She was being silly, she told herself. Modern medical facilities were supposed to be efficient, and everyone had been perfectly professional, even if they weren't exactly warm. The orientation session flew by in a blur of PowerPoint slides and information packets. Mara took careful notes, trying to focus despite her growing fatigue. Other potential surrogates sat around her, some looking as overwhelmed as she felt, others appearing excited and confident. By the time she left the building, the sun was setting. The glass walls now reflected orange and purple clouds, and the lobby that had been so busy that morning was nearly empty. Her feet ached as she waited for the bus, but for the first time in months, she felt something like peace. They'd given her an advance payment, enough to cover this month's bills and get her grandmother's prescription filled. The small apartment she shared with her grandmother was dark when she arrived home, except for the soft glow of the television her grandmother often fell asleep to. Mara moved quietly through the living room, placing her bag down and checking on the elderly woman dozing in her favorite recliner. Her grandmother's face was relaxed in sleep, the worry lines that usually creased her forehead temporarily smoothed away. The empty pill bottle sat on the side table. Tomorrow, Mara would be able to get it refilled. Tomorrow, she could tell her grandmother that their prayers had been answered. Mara gently adjusted the thin blanket covering her grandmother's legs. "I'm doing this for us, Grandma," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the low murmur of the television. "Things are going to get better now, I promise." She brushed a soft kiss against her grandmother's forehead, careful not to wake her. Standing there in the dim light, watching the peaceful rise and fall of her grandmother's chest, Mara felt the first real stirrings of hope she'd experienced in years. Whatever doubts she'd had about the surrogacy program's clinical atmosphere faded as she imagined finally being able to provide the care her grandmother deserved. The stack of signed papers in her bag seemed to carry the weight of both obligation and possibility. Tomorrow would bring more appointments, more procedures, more steps toward this new future she'd chosen. But for now, in the quiet of their small apartment, Mara allowed herself to believe that she'd found their miracle. Her grandmother stirred slightly in her sleep, mumbling something that sounded like a prayer. Mara smiled, remembering how her grandmother always said that God provides, even when the path forward seems impossible to see. Maybe this was his answer, not what either of them had expected, but an answer nonetheless. The clock on the wall ticked softly, marking time in this moment between their struggling past and what Mara prayed would be a brighter future. She sank into the worn couch, finally allowing her tired body to rest, while keeping watch over the person she loved most in the world. For the first time in longer than she could remember, the weight of unpaid bills and impossible choices didn't feel quite so crushing. In the morning, she would begin this new journey in earnest. But for now, in this quiet moment, hope felt like a warm blanket wrapped around her shoulders, promising that better days were finally within reach. The bright, fluorescent lights of the hospital delivery room cast harsh shadows as Mara gripped the metal side rail of the bed, her knuckles white with tension. 9 months had passed in a blur of doctor's appointments, and carefully monitored schedules, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. "Push. You're almost there," the nurse coached, her voice stern rather than encouraging. The room was crowded with New Horizons staff, more people than Mara expected for a routine delivery. Their presence felt oppressive rather than supportive. Sweat trickled down Mara's temples as another contraction gripped her body. The pain was intense, but something else bothered her more: the way the staff kept exchanging quick glances, the hurried whispers she couldn't quite make out. "The baby will go straight to neonatal care," a nurse assured her, though the words came out rushed and mechanical. "Standard procedure." Mara wanted to question this. She'd read everything she could about surrogacy, and immediate separation wasn't typical unless there were complications. But another contraction hit before she could speak. "One more big push," the doctor ordered. "We can see the head." Gathering her remaining strength, Mara bore down. The pressure built until suddenly it released, and a sharp cry pierced the air. The sound went straight to Mara's heart, awakening something primal and powerful within her. "My baby," she whispered, reaching out weakly. "Please, can I just see—" But the nurse had already whisked the infant away, efficiently wrapping the tiny form in a blanket. Mara caught only a glimpse of dark curls before her daughter was handed to a stern-faced woman in a business suit who had appeared in the doorway. The administrator's heels clicked against the floor as she approached Mara's bedside. Her expression was devoid of warmth as she adjusted her grip on the bundle. "The infant settles the outstanding debt outlined in your contract," she stated, her tone as cold and sterile as the hospital air. "What?" Mara tried to push herself up, panic rising in her chest. "No, that's not. I need to see her, please!" The baby's cries grew fainter as the administrator turned towards the door. Mara's heart raced as she struggled to sit up, ignoring the pain that tore through her body. "Wait! Stop! That's my baby!" "Nurse!" the administrator called sharply over her shoulder. Mara felt a sharp sting in her arm. Looking down, she saw a nurse withdrawing a syringe. "What did you give me?" Her words came out slurred as the room began to tilt and blur around her. "Just something to help you rest," the nurse said, but her voice seemed to come from very far away. The world turned grey at the edges. Mara tried to call out again, but her tongue felt heavy and uncooperative. The last thing she saw was her daughter being carried away, the infant's cries fading down the hallway. Time became fluid, stretching and contracting like waves. Mara was vaguely aware of being moved, of fluorescent lights passing overhead as she was wheeled down a corridor. When her eyes finally focused again, she found herself in a recovery room, stark and empty except for the steady beeping of monitors. "My baby," she croaked, her throat dry. "Where's my baby?" No one answered. The room remained silent except for the mechanical sounds of equipment. Mara pressed the call button. Minutes ticked by. She pressed it again. And again. When a nurse finally appeared, she avoided Mara's eyes as she checked vital signs. "Please!" Mara begged. "I need to see my daughter. Where did they take her?" "I'll find someone to speak with you," the nurse murmured, but her tone made it clear this was an empty promise. Hours passed, each time someone entered the room, to bring water, to adjust equipment, to check her status. Mara asked about her baby. Each time she was met with averted gazes and vague deferrals. The sedative's fog slowly lifted, leaving behind a horrible clarity. Something was terribly wrong. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. She'd agreed to be a surrogate, yes, but nothing in the contract had mentioned this cold efficiency, this absolute separation. Through the window, she could see the sky changing colors as day faded into evening. Her body ached, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the hollow emptiness in her chest. Her arms felt unbearably empty. Somewhere in this building, her daughter was crying for her, and she couldn't reach her. Mara's questions continued to echo unanswered in the sterile room. With each passing hour, the weight of what had happened pressed harder against her chest. She had walked into New Horizons 9 months ago looking for hope, for a way to help her grandmother. Instead, she found herself alone in a hospital room, her baby gone, and no one willing to tell her why. The morning sun cast harsh shadows across the hospital corridor as Mara pushed herself up from the bed. Every movement sent waves of pain through her body, but she couldn't stay here another minute. Not with her baby somewhere out there, alone. Her legs trembled as she stood. Someone, probably a night shift nurse, had left an oversized grey coat draped over a chair. Mara pulled it on over her thin hospital gown, grateful for any coverage. The coat smelled of cigarettes and coffee, but it would have to do. The halls were quieter now, with only occasional staff rushing past. No one stopped her as she made her way towards the exit, though each step felt like walking on broken glass. Her body screamed at her to rest, to heal, but her heart pushed her forward. Bright sunlight blinded her as she pushed through the front doors. The world spun sickeningly, and the concrete steps before her seemed to multiply and blur. Just a few more steps, she told herself. Just get down these steps and figure out what to do next. Her knees buckled on the third step. The ground rushed up to meet her as her vision darkened at the edges. But instead of hitting concrete, she felt strong arms catch her, breaking her fall. "Easy there," a deep voice said. "I've got you." Mara tried to pull away, but her body wouldn't cooperate. The stranger helped her to a nearby bench, his movements gentle but efficient. "Here, drink this," he said, pressing a bottle of water into her hands. Small sips. She looked up at him then. A tall man in his late 30s, wearing an expensive suit that seemed at odds with his tousled dark hair. His face was handsome but serious, with the kind of intensity that suggested he rarely smiled. "Who are you?" Mara managed between sips of water. "Declan Royce," he answered, settling beside her on the bench but maintaining a respectful distance. "And you're Mara Johnson. You just gave birth inside that facility, and they took your baby." Mara nearly dropped the water bottle. "How do you—" "I've been investigating New Horizons for years," he explained, his voice dropping lower. "Their surrogacy program is a front for something much darker. I arrived this morning hoping to gather more evidence, and then I saw you leaving." His controlled demeanor slipped for a moment as he asked, "They told you the baby was payment for a debt?" Mara nodded, tears threatening to spill. "They wouldn't let me see her. They just took her and—" Her voice broke. The rage that flashed across Declan's face was startling in its intensity. His hands clenched into fists before he visibly forced himself to relax them. "Listen to me carefully, Mara," he said, turning to face her fully. "What they're doing is illegal. It's part of a larger trafficking network that I've been working to expose. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I can help you get your daughter back." Mara studied his face, looking for any sign of deception. His eyes met hers steadily, and despite her fear, she saw nothing but determination and barely contained anger, not at her, but at the situation. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you help me?" Something haunted flickered across his expression before he masked it. "Because no parent should have their child stolen from them. Because what they're doing is wrong, and I have the resources to fight them." He pulled out a phone, his movements precise and controlled again. "I have a secure location where you can rest and recover while we plan our next steps. My driver can take us there now, if you're willing to trust me." Mara's head spun with exhaustion and fear, Everything in her screamed that this was crazy, trusting a stranger, no matter how well-dressed or seemingly sincere. But what choice did she have? She had no money, no phone, and no idea where they'd taken her baby. And something in the way Declan's composure had cracked when hearing about her daughter made her want to believe him. "Okay," she whispered, her voice rough with unshed tears. Declan nodded once, already dialing. "James, bring the car around front. Yes, now." He ended the call and turned back to Mara. "We'll get her back," he promised quietly. "Whatever it takes." Mara hugged the borrowed coat tighter around herself as a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. Her entire body ached and fear clawed at her chest. But as Declan helped her to her feet, she forced herself to take one step, then another. Somewhere out there, her daughter needed her. And right now, this intense stranger with rage in his eyes and resources at his fingertips seemed like her only hope of finding her. The black car wound its way up this mountain road, tall pines swaying gently in the afternoon breeze. Mara pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window, trying to steady her racing thoughts. Every curve of the road took her further from her baby, but Declan had promised this was necessary, that they needed somewhere safe to plan. The car finally turned onto a private drive, passing through heavy iron gates that opened automatically. As they approached the lodge, Mara's eyes widened. The structure was impressive, yet somehow welcoming, with natural stone and weathered wood blending seamlessly into the mountainside. A sparkling lake stretched out below, its surface catching the late afternoon sun. "We're here," Declan said quietly from beside her. He'd been mostly silent during the drive, making occasional phone calls in low, urgent tones. The car came to a stop, and before Declan could move, the front door of the lodge opened. A woman with silver hair and kind eyes hurried down the steps, concern etched on her face. "Mrs. Ames?" Declan said as he helped Mara from the car. "This is Mara Johnson. She needs medical attention and rest." "Oh, you poor dear," Mrs. Ames said, taking in Mara's hospital gown under the borrowed coat. She shot Declan a knowing look before gently taking Mara's arm. "Let's get you settled properly." The interior of the lodge was as welcoming as its exterior, all warm woods and soft fabrics, with large windows framing the mountain view. Mrs. Ames led Mara up a curved staircase to a comfortable guest room decorated in soothing blues and greens. "The bathroom's through there," she said, opening a door to reveal a spacious ensuite. "I've laid out everything you might need. Clean clothes, toiletries. There's a bathrobe on the hook. Why don't you have a shower while I make up the bed with fresh linens?" Mara wanted to protest that she didn't have time for such luxuries, but her body ached fiercely. "Thank you," she managed instead. The hot water helped ease some of her physical pain, though nothing could touch the hollow ache in her chest where her baby should be. When she emerged, wrapped in the softest robe she'd ever felt, Mrs. Ames had indeed changed the bedding and laid out comfortable clothes in her size. "Rest for a bit," the older woman insisted. "I'll wake you when dinner's ready." Despite her protests that she couldn't possibly sleep, Mara found herself drifting off almost as soon as her head hit the pillow. When Mrs. Ames gently woke her, the sun was setting, painting the lake in shades of orange and pink. Downstairs, the dining room table was set simply but elegantly. The smell of homemade soup made Mara's stomach growl, reminding her she hadn't eaten in what felt like days. "Chicken noodle," Mrs. Ames said, placing a bowl in front of her. "Good for healing." Declan joined them, having changed from his suit into more casual clothes. He waited until they'd eaten some before speaking. "I need to tell you what we're up against," he said, his voice grave. "New Horizons isn't what it appears to be. The surrogacy program is real on the surface, but it's a cover for something much darker Mara set down her spoon, her appetite suddenly gone. "The baby auction ring?" He nodded. "They target women in desperate situations, usually with significant medical bills or other debts. The contracts are deliberately confusing, filled with hidden clauses that essentially give them ownership rights to the babies. Then they sell the infants to the highest bidders through what they call transfer events." "But that's impossible," Mara whispered, though she knew it wasn't. "Someone would have stopped them." "Many have tried. I've been gathering evidence for years, but they're protected by powerful people. Several women have come forward about missing babies, but they've all been discredited or scared into silence." He paused, his jaw tightening. "Until now, we've never had someone willing to fight back who also has proof of the crime in real time." Mrs. Ames reached over and squeezed Mara's hand. "You're not alone in this fight, dear." After dinner, Declan led Mara to his home office. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the walls lined with books and files. He pulled out a thick folder and spread several documents across his desk. "These are the scheduled transfer events for the next month," he explained, pointing to a calendar marked with dates and locations. "Based on when your daughter was born and their usual timeline." He traced his finger down the page, stopping at a date circled in red. "Here, 4 days from now." Mara's hands shook as she picked up the printout. 4 days. They had just 4 days to save her baby before she disappeared forever into the auction ring's network. "How?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How do we stop them?" The fire popped and crackled in the silence that followed, sending sparks up the chimney as Mara gripped the paper tighter, the reality of their deadline settling heavily over the room. 4 days to save her daughter. 4 days to bring down an organization that had evaded justice for years. The paper trembled in her hands as she stared at the circled date, each second ticking away precious time they couldn't afford to waste. Sunlight streamed through the guest room windows as Mara slowly opened her eyes. The aroma of fresh coffee drifted upstairs, accompanied by Mrs. Ames's gentle humming from the kitchen below. For a moment, Mara felt almost peaceful, until reality crashed back, bringing with it the crushing weight of her missing daughter. She dressed quickly in the comfortable clothes Mrs. Ames had provided and made her way downstairs. The wooden steps creaked softly under her feet as she followed the inviting smell of breakfast. "Good morning, dear," Mrs. Ames called out, her voice warm and welcoming. She stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with practiced ease. "Have a seat. Coffee's fresh." Declan was already at the dining table, several folders spread out before him. He looked up as Mara entered, his expression both determined and gentle. "Sleep well." Mara nodded, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. Mrs. Ames set a steaming mug of coffee in front of her, along with a plate of golden pancakes drizzled with maple syrup. "Eat first," Mrs. Ames insisted when Declan opened his mouth to speak. "Business can wait until after breakfast." They ate in comfortable silence, broken only by the clink of silverware and Mrs. Ames's quiet movements around the kitchen. When their plates were cleared, Declan pushed the folders aside and turned to face Mara directly. "I have a plan," he said, his voice steady. "But it's not without risk, and I need you to understand exactly what we're dealing with before you agree." Mara wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, drawing strength from its warmth. "Tell me. These auction events, they're extremely exclusive, invitation only, heavily secured. But I've managed to get intel about one happening in 4 days." He paused, studying her face. "The only way to get inside is with a rock-solid cover story. They'll be expecting couples looking to acquire infants through their network." Mara's breath caught as understanding dawned. "You want us to pose as a couple, yes. My romantic partner who shares my interest in their elite infant placement services. His voice was gentle but firm. It's the only way to access areas that would normally be restricted. We'll need to convince them we're legitimate potential buyers. Fear crawled up Mara's spine. I don't know if I can do that. I'm not an actress. What if I mess up? What if they recognize me? You won't be alone for a second. Declan assured her, leaning forward. Everything will be carefully rehearsed. Mrs. Ames used to work in theatre. She'll help us practice our roles until they're second nature. Mrs. Ames nodded encouragingly from her spot near the kitchen counter. We'll make sure you're prepared, dear. Sometimes the best performance comes from speaking truth through a different lens. Declan spread out several documents on the table. I've already started putting together our cover identities. Financial records, social media presence, everything they might check. He showed her a pristine driver's license with her photo, but a different name. These credentials will hold up to scrutiny. How did you get these so quickly? Mara asked, examining the perfectly crafted ID. I've been building this case for years, he explained. I have trusted contacts who understand what we're fighting against. We'll have secure communications, emergency extraction plans, every detail covered. As they went through the logistics, Mara noticed something shift in Declan's demeanor. His usual businesslike approach softened when he spoke about their mission to rescue her daughter. Once we locate our little girl, he said, then caught himself. Your daughter, I mean, we'll have people ready to move immediately. The slip made Mara's heart skip a beat. The way he'd said, our little girl, so natural, so protective, stirred something unexpected inside her. It was unsettling how easily he'd included himself in her daughter's fate, yet somehow comforting too. They spent hours going over every detail of their cover story. How they met, where they lived, their supposed shared desire for a family. Mrs. Ames brought them lunch and helped them practice their interactions, offering suggestions on how to make their relationship appear genuine but not overdone. As afternoon faded into evening, Mara stood by the large windows watching darkness settle over the pine trees. The lodge's lights reflected off the lake's surface, creating twin points of warmth in the growing night. Her mind raced with everything they'd covered: fake backgrounds, memorized details, contingency plans. We can do this, Declan said quietly, coming to stand beside her. I know it's asking a lot, but I believe in you. You're stronger than you know. Mara turned to look at him, seeing the determination in his eyes. Despite her lingering doubts, despite the fear that threatened to overwhelm her, she knew this was her daughter's best chance. Okay, she said finally. I'll do it, whatever it takes to get her back. The word yes hung between them as night fell completely, transforming the window into a mirror that reflected their images standing side by side. Mara could see her own uncertainty in the glass, but she could also see Declan's unwavering resolve. Her inner doubts still whispered warnings, but she pushed them aside, focusing instead on the thought of holding her daughter again. Mrs. Ames appeared in the reflection behind them, her presence steady and reassuring. Time for dinner, she announced softly. You'll both need your strength for what's ahead. The morning sun had barely crested the mountains when a sleek black car wound its way up the lodge's private drive. Mara watched from the kitchen window, coffee cup warming her hands, as Declan greeted a man carrying several heavy cases of equipment. This is Marcus, Declan introduced as they entered. He's the best technical expert I know, and more importantly, someone I trust completely. Marcus, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and salt and pepper hair, gave Mara a reassuring smile. Let's make you disappear and reappear as someone new, shall we? For the next several hours, Marcus meticulously photographed Mara against different backgrounds, created multiple forms of identification, and built what he called a digital footprint, social media accounts, credit histories, and other records that would withstand scrutiny. The key, Marcus explained while adjusting something on his laptop, is to create a presence that looks lived in, not freshly made. We're backdating everything to make it appear you've been part of Declan's social circle for years. While Marcus worked his technical magic, Mrs. Ames led Mara upstairs to address the physical aspects of her transformation. The housekeeper had already arranged several racks of designer clothing in one of the guest rooms. "These pieces will help you look the part," Mrs. Ames said, selecting a cream-colored cashmere sweater. "But more importantly, they'll help you feel it. When you're dressed well, you carry yourself differently." Mara ran her fingers over the soft fabric, remembering the threadbare scrubs she'd worn during her long shifts at the clinic. "I've never worn anything like this." "The key is confidence, dear," Mrs. Ames advised, helping Mara try on different outfits. "Remember, you're not pretending to be someone else entirely. You're still yourself, just in different circumstances." They worked on Mara's walk next, how to move with the easy grace of someone accustomed to luxury. Mrs. Ames demonstrated the subtle difference between hurrying and purposeful movement, between slouching and maintaining proper posture. "Think of it as wearing invisible armor," the older woman suggested. "Let it make you feel protected rather than restricted." By early afternoon, they moved on to the most challenging part of their preparation, making Mara and Declan's relationship appear genuine. They gathered in the lodge's great room, where Mrs. Ames observed their interactions with a critical eye. "You need to look natural together," she instructed. "Start with something simple, holding hands while walking." Mara's palm felt sweaty as Declan's fingers interlaced with hers. They walked the length of the room, their steps awkward and mismatched at first. "Relax your shoulders," Mrs. Ames called out. "Declan, slow down a bit. Match her pace. Remember, you're supposed to be comfortable with each other." They practiced over and over. Casual touches, the way they sat together on the couch, how to exchange looks that suggested shared history. Declan would rest his hand lightly on Mara's lower back as they walked, or she would straighten his collar with familiar ease. "Better." Mrs. Ames nodded after their 20th attempt at entering a room together. "But Mara, try to lean into him slightly when he touches your shoulder. It should look instinctive." Despite her initial embarrassment, Mara found herself growing more comfortable with each rehearsal. Declan maintained a respectful distance whenever they weren't actively practicing, and his quiet support helped ease her anxiety. As late afternoon approached, they moved to Declan's study to review the encrypted files he'd gathered on the auction ring. Spread across his desk were floor plans, staff schedules, and security protocols. "These recording devices are virtually undetectable," Declan explained, showing her what looked like ordinary jewelry, a delicate bracelet and matching earrings. "They'll capture both audio and video. The feed transmits directly to a secure server." Mara carefully fastened the bracelet around her wrist. "How will we know where to look once we're inside?" "I've identified several restricted areas where they likely hold documentation of their transactions." Declan pointed to marked sections on the building plans. "We'll need to find a way to access at least one of these rooms during the event." As the sun began to set, they took a break to walk around the lake. The evening air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine needles and approaching autumn. Their footsteps crunched softly on the gravel path as they walked in companionable silence. Near the water's edge, Mara stopped, wrapping her arms around herself. "What if I mess this up?" she whispered. "What if I say the wrong thing or act suspicious and they figure out who I really am?" Declan turned to face her, his expression serious in the fading light. "Look at how far you've come already. You're learning faster than anyone I've ever worked with, and you have something they can't prepare for. Genuine motivation to succeed." But the stakes are so high. Mara's voice cracked slightly. My daughter's future depends on this working. I believe in you completely, Declan said firmly, meeting her eyes. Your love for your daughter is your strength, not your weakness. Trust that. Trust yourself. The surface of the lake reflected the last rays of sunlight, turning the water to liquid gold. A gentle breeze stirred the trees around them as they stood there, two people united in their determination to right a terrible wrong. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine grounds of New Horizons satellite campus as Declan's black Mercedes pulled up to the entrance. Mara smoothed her navy silk dress, her fingers trembling slightly as she adjusted the recording bracelet on her wrist. The elegant outfit felt like a costume, though Mrs. Ames had assured her she looked perfectly natural in it. Remember, Declan murmured, helping her from the car. You belong here. We're just another wealthy couple exploring our options. His hand settled warmly against her lower back, steadying her. The glass doors slid open silently as they approached. Inside, the lobby gleamed with polished marble and modern art. A receptionist with perfectly coiffed blonde hair rose from behind a curved desk, her smile bright and practiced. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, welcome to New Horizons. She extended her manicured hand. I'm Rebecca. We're so pleased you've chosen to consider our exclusive placement services. Mara forced herself to smile, remembering how different her own intake experience had been in the main facility. No marble floors or designer furniture there, just hard plastic chairs and fluorescent lighting. Rebecca led them down a wide hallway lined with framed photographs of smiling babies. Our showcase room is just ahead. Several of our preferred clients are already here for today's orientation. Mara's grip tightened on Declan's arm as they entered a large room filled with clusters of well-dressed people sipping champagne. Security guards in dark suits stood at strategic points around the perimeter, their earpieces barely visible. Would you care for a refreshment? Rebecca gestured to a uniformed server. Perhaps later, Declan replied smoothly. We're quite eager to learn more about your program first. A tall man in an impeccably tailored suit approached them, his silver hair and commanding presence drawing immediate attention. Mara recognized him instantly, the director she'd glimpsed briefly during her time as a surrogate. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Ah, the Sterlings, he said, extending his hand to Declan. I'm Director Harrison. Your reputation precedes you. Your work in international finance is quite impressive. Declan's performance was flawless. He discussed fictional business dealings and shared fabricated stories about their desire for a child with just the right mix of authority and warmth. Mara forced herself to maintain a pleasant expression, though her skin crawled as the director's calculating gaze assessed her. Your wife is lovely, the director commented, his eyes lingering on Mara. I'm curious why you've chosen our services rather than traditional methods? Medical complications? Mara replied softly, the rehearsed lie flowing smoothly. We've explored other options, but your program's reputation for discretion and results is unmatched. The director's smile didn't reach his eyes. Indeed. Shall we begin the tour? I think you'll find our facilities quite state-of-the-art. They followed him through security-coded doors into the heart of the building. The first stop was a viewing area overlooking what appeared to be a traditional hospital nursery. Rows of clear bassinets held sleeping infants, most hooked up to monitoring equipment. Our newest arrivals, the director explained. We ensure optimal conditions for their transition period. Mara fought to keep her expression neutral as she noticed the IV drips attached to many of the babies. They were being sedated, kept quiet and compliant while awaiting placement. The next stop was even more disturbing. Behind thick glass walls, refrigeration units hummed softly, storing rows of labeled samples. "We maintain extensive genetic profiles," the director said. "It allows us to provide detailed health histories to our clients." But Mara could read between the lines. They were stockpiling DNA samples, likely to prove parentage if anyone ever questioned the legitimacy of their operation. Her nausea grew as they continued down sterile hallways. They paused before a massive digital display wall showing dozens of infant profiles. Each entry included photos, physical descriptions, and genetic highlights, like a grotesque shopping catalogue. "Our current availability," the director said proudly. "We can filter by whatever criteria interest you: gender, ethnicity, predicted traits." Mara scanned the profiles, desperately, looking for any sign of her daughter, but most of the babies appeared to be newborn. Her little girl would be almost 9 months old now. "Fascinating," Declan commented, maintaining his interested facade. "And what's the typical timeline from selection to placement?" "That depends on various factors," the director replied smoothly. "But we pride ourselves on efficiency. Once payment clears, transfers can happen quite quickly." The tour concluded in a luxurious consultation room. As the director outlined their premium package options, Mara focused on breathing steadily, fighting back the horror threatening to overwhelm her. Finally, after what felt like hours, they were walking back to their car. Mara's legs felt wooden, her smile frozen in place until they were safely inside the Mercedes with the tinted windows shielding them from view. As soon as they pulled away from the facility, she broke down. Harsh sobs tore from her throat as the full impact of what they'd witnessed hit her. All those babies, treated like merchandise. All those mothers, like her, whose children had been stolen. "Hey," Declan said softly, reaching across to grasp her hand. "We're going to stop them. What we saw today, the evidence we gathered, it brings us one step closer to finding your daughter and shutting this whole operation down." Mara wiped her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. "They're monsters," she whispered. "How can they do this? How can they just trade babies like they're nothing?" "They won't get away with it much longer," Declan promised, his jaw set with determination. "We have proof now of what they're really doing, and we're going to make them pay for every family they've destroyed." The Mercedes wound its way back towards the mountain lodge as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the road. Mara closed her eyes, holding tight to Declan's hand, drawing strength from his steady presence as she tried to process the horrors they'd witnessed. Tomorrow they would begin planning their next move, but for now, she allowed herself to grieve for all the mothers and babies trapped in New Horizons' web of corruption. The mountain air held an early morning chill as a black SUV wound its way up the narrow road to Declan's lodge. Inside, Mara watched the sun peek over the distant peaks, casting golden light across the pine forest. She had barely slept, her mind still processing the horrors they'd witnessed at New Horizons the day before. Mrs. Ames was already brewing coffee when Marcus Chen, Declan's cybersecurity expert, arrived. He carried several laptops and hard drives, his usual easy smile replaced by a grim expression that made Mara's stomach tighten. "You'll want to sit down for this," Marcus said as they gathered in Declan's wood-paneled office. The room still smelled of cedar and leather, but today it felt more like a war room than a sanctuary. Marcus connected his equipment and projected files onto the wall screen. The encryption was sophisticated, but they got sloppy with their backup systems. Once I found a way in, everything was there. Years of records. Spreadsheets, medical files, and photographs filled the screen. Marcus clicked through them methodically, explaining as he went. "They've been harvesting and storing embryos without consent, falsifying paperwork, and selling genetic material to the highest bidders." Mara leaned forward, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair. The dates stretched back more than 5 years. Hundreds of names scrolled past, women who had come to New Horizons hoping for help, only to have their trust betrayed. "Wait," she said suddenly, her voice cracking. "Go back 3 files." Marcus clicked backward, and there it was, her own intake paperwork from 9 months ago. But something was wrong. The date stamp on the genetic profile they'd created for her was from 2 weeks before she'd ever set foot in their office. "They were tracking me," she whispered. "They knew who I was before I even walked through their door." Her hands began to shake as she realized the full scope of their manipulation. "My grandmother's medical bills getting worse, the clinic cutting my hours. None of that was random, was it?" Declan moved to stand behind her chair, his presence steady and reassuring. "They identify vulnerable targets," he said quietly. "Women who are desperate enough to sign whatever they put in front of them." Marcus continued searching through the files, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "There's more. They've been running parallel operations, legitimate surrogacies as cover, while maintaining a separate database of premium merchandise for their real clients." Suddenly Declan went very still. Mara felt the change in him before she saw what had caught his attention on the screen. "Marcus," he said, his voice strange and hollow. "Access file EC2847. The screen filled with medical records and a familiar face, a young woman with auburn hair and bright green eyes, smiling at the camera. Declan sank heavily into his chair, all color draining from his face. "Emma," he breathed. They had Emma's embryos. Mara remembered the newspaper stories from years ago, how Declan's fiancée had died in a car accident just months before their wedding. She had been a promising medical researcher working on breakthrough fertility treatments. She was storing embryos as part of her research. Declan explained, his voice raw. When she died, the hospital said they'd been destroyed in a storage malfunction. But they sold them. They sold our children. His shoulders began to shake. Mara moved without thinking, kneeling beside his chair and taking his hand in both of hers. His fingers were ice cold. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her heart aching for his pain. "I'm so sorry they did this to you both." For a long moment, the only sound was the quiet hum of computers and Declan's ragged breathing as he struggled to maintain his composure. Marcus quietly excused himself, leaving them alone. "I thought I'd made peace with losing her," Declan said finally. "But this, knowing they violated her trust, that they took something so precious—" His voice broke. "We had talked about having children someday. She would have been an amazing mother." Mara squeezed his hand tighter, offering what comfort she could. "They've hurt so many people," she said softly. "Stolen so many dreams." Declan looked down at their joined hands, then met her eyes. Tears still shone in his, but something else burned there too, a fierce determination that made her breath catch. "We're going to destroy them," he said, his voice growing stronger. "Not just expose them, destroy them. Every person who profited from this, every administrator who looked the other way, every doctor who betrayed their oath. They're going to pay for what they've done." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, sitting up straighter. "They took your daughter. They took Emma's legacy. They've taken so much from so many families. But this ends now." Mara nodded, still holding his hand, understanding that their mission had become even more personal for both of them. They weren't just fighting for her baby anymore. They were fighting for justice, for all the lives that had been shattered by New Horizons' greed. The morning sun now streamed fully through the office windows, warming the room and casting their shadows on the wall. Two people brought together by loss and betrayal, finding strength in each other to face the battle ahead. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the polished floors of New Horizons as Mara and Declan returned for their follow-up consultation. Mara's heart thundered against her ribs, though she maintained the poised smile they'd practiced. Her cream-colored designer suit felt like armor, helping her play the part of a wealthy woman seeking to expand her family. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling. The receptionist greeted them warmly, using their cover names. The director will see you shortly. Would you like some water while you wait? That would be lovely, Declan replied smoothly, his hand resting casually at the small of Mara's back. The gesture looked romantic to observers, but was actually meant to steady her nerves. They were led to a private consultation room decorated in soothing blues and greys. While they waited, Declan discreetly touched the briefcase containing the micro-cameras. They were smaller than pennies, designed to blend perfectly with the facility's existing security equipment. The director entered with his practiced smile. The Sterlings. Wonderful to see you again. I trust you've had time to consider our premium placement options? We have, Declan said warmly. Though I wondered if we might tour the executive wing again. My wife was particularly impressed with the setup there, and we'd like to better understand how your operation runs before making our final decision. The director's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course, though I should mention that area is typically restricted to staff only. Oh? Declan raised an eyebrow. I assumed as potential investors we would have full access. Perhaps we should reconsider our level of involvement. The threat of lost money worked its magic. No, I'm sure we can make an exception. Please, follow me. As they walked the hallways, Declan engaged the director in conversation about expansion plans and profit margins. Each time they paused, he would gesture enthusiastically or lean against a wall, secretly placing the tiny cameras in strategic locations. Mara played her part, asking carefully rehearsed questions about their careful matching process and exclusive client services. Her stomach churned at the director's smooth answers, knowing they masked a horrifying truth. A young woman in scrubs hurried past them, head down. But as she passed Mara, their eyes met briefly. The employee's face was drawn with anxiety, and she deliberately brushed against Mara's arm, pressing something into her hand. Mara kept her expression neutral as she felt the folded paper, slipping it into her pocket without missing a beat in her conversation. Her heart rate doubled, but she forced herself to remain calm. The tour concluded in the director's office, where Declan placed the final camera while pretending to admire the view. We'll be in touch soon about our decision, he promised as they prepared to leave. They maintained their composure until they reached their car in the parking garage. Only then did Mara's hands begin to shake as she pulled out the folded note. "Oh, God," she whispered, scanning the contents. It was a printed list of auction dates and lot numbers, with one entry circled in trembling pen. Infant J3, female, African American premium grade, 8A genetic profile, optimal sale date, March 15. 10 days. Mara breathed, her voice breaking. They're selling my baby in 10 days. Declan studied the list over her shoulder, his jaw tight. This confirms what we suspected about their timeline, and now we have an employee willing to help us. The drive back to the lodge passed in tense silence. Mrs. Ames had dinner waiting, but Mara couldn't eat. She sat in the great room instead, watching Marcus set up monitors to receive the camera feeds. As night fell, the screens flickered to life. The cameras provided crystal-clear views of offices, hallways, and meeting rooms. Around 9 o'clock, movement caught their attention. The director had returned to his office with several staff members. The Singapore transfer is confirmed for Wednesday, he was saying, shuffling papers on his desk. Make sure the documentation shows the infants as being adopted through proper channels. And double-check the sedation protocols. We can't have any crying during transport. Mara pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting back nausea. These people talked about trafficking babies as casually as shipping packages. "The premium auction is our priority," the director continued. "Those buyers are paying top dollar and they expect perfection. Especially for J3, the genetic markers on that one are exceptional." Unable to listen anymore, Mara moved to the antique rocking chair near the fireplace. The gentle motion was soothing, though it also reminded her painfully of how she'd imagined rocking her own baby. She stared into the flames, picturing her daughter somewhere in that cold facility, probably drugged, definitely alone. Was she crying for her mother? Did she feel abandoned? The questions tortured Mara as she rocked back and forth, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. She didn't notice Declan approaching until he knelt beside her chair. His hand covered hers where it gripped the armrest, warm and steady. "We're getting close," he said softly. The firelight reflected in his eyes, along with an iron determination that matched her own. "We're getting close." The showcase event glittered with wealth and privilege. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across marble floors, while string musicians played softly in the corner. Mara clung to Declan's arm, her emerald evening gown concealing how badly her knees shook. Around them, prospective parents sipped champagne and discussed genetic profiles as casually as discussing the weather. "Remember to breathe," Declan murmured, his hand steady at the small of her back. "We're just another wealthy couple shopping for a designer baby." Mara forced a smile, though her heart ached watching nurses in crisp white uniforms wheeling bassinets behind gauzy curtains at the room's perimeter. Each contained a precious life being treated like merchandise. "Mr. and Mrs. Sterling." The director approached, champagne in hand. "I'm so pleased you could join us this evening. I trust you'll find exactly what you're looking for." "We're quite selective," Declan replied smoothly. "But your reputation for premium offerings precedes you." They made small talk about genetic screening and optimal outcomes, while Mara scanned the room. A nurse emerged from behind one of the curtains, cradling a swaddled infant. As she passed, Mara caught a glimpse of the baby's face, and her heart stopped. There, just below the tiny ear, was a distinctive heart-shaped birthmark. The same mark she'd traced with trembling fingers during those precious few moments before they took her daughter away. "Darling?" Declan's voice pulled her back. "Would you like another drink?" She started to shake her head, but then saw the subtle signal in his eyes. "Yes, please." The moment Declan stepped away, he accidentally collided with a waiter. The crash of breaking glass drew everyone's attention as champagne splashed across the marble floor. "How clumsy of me!" Declan exclaimed loudly. "Please, let me help clean this up." In the commotion, Mara slipped behind the nearest curtain. The nursery area was dimly lit, with several bassinets arranged in neat rows. Her hands trembled as she moved from one to another, checking each sleeping face. Then she saw her. The birthmark confirmed what her mother's heart already knew. Her daughter lay sleeping peacefully, dark curls peeking out from her blanket. Tears streamed down Mara's face as she lifted her baby for the first time in months. "My sweet girl," she whispered, pressing gentle kisses to her daughter's forehead. "Mommy's here now." "Mara." Declan appeared beside her, his expression urgent. "We need to move. Now." Clutching her precious bundle, Mara followed Declan toward a side exit. Freedom was just steps away, until black uniformed security guards materialized from every direction, weapons drawn. "Well, well." The director's voice dripped with cold amusement. "I must admit, you played your parts beautifully, but did you really think we wouldn't recognize the infamous Declan Royce?" This ends now, Declan growled. These babies belong with their real mothers. Oh, I'm afraid not. The director gestured to someone behind them. You see, we have friends in very high places. Declan's face went pale as his former mentor stepped into view. Richard, how could you? Nothing personal, my boy. The older man's smile didn't reach his eyes. But there's too much money at stake to let your moral crusade interfere. Everything happened in a blur. A guard fired his taser and Declan crashed to the floor. Mara screamed as strong hands tore her baby from her arms. She fought wildly, but two guards dragged her toward a side door. No, please! My baby! Her desperate cries echoed off the marble walls. The last thing she saw was her daughter being whisked away by a nurse, while Declan lay motionless on the floor. Then she was shoved into a small waiting room, the door locking with a final click. The director's face appeared in the window. Your billionaire can't save you now. The first hints of dawn painted the sky in muted greys as Mara pressed herself against the cold wall of the waiting room. Her muscles ached from hours spent huddled on the hard floor, but her mind remained sharp, watching and waiting. Through the small window in the door, she observed the night security guard checking his watch repeatedly, his movements becoming sluggish as his shift neared its end. When voices echoed down the hallway signaling the morning shift change, Mara seized her chance. The guard left his post, heading toward the break room where coffee and conversation awaited. With trembling fingers, Mara used a bobby pin from her now disheveled updo to work the simple lock, a skill learned from countless hours of babysitting mischievous toddlers who loved locking themselves in bathrooms. The door clicked open softly. Heart pounding, Mara slipped into the empty hallway. Her evening gown rustled against the sterile floor as she crept toward the emergency exit, every shadow making her freeze. The facility felt different in the pre-dawn quiet, more ominous, its pristine surfaces hiding darker secrets. She pushed through the fire exit, bracing for alarms that never came. The cool morning air hit her face as she stumbled into an alley behind the building. Without looking back, Mara ran. Her designer heels, chosen for last night's undercover operation, clacked against the pavement until they broke. She kicked them off, continuing barefoot through streets that grew progressively less familiar. The sun climbed higher as Mara wandered, putting distance between herself and the facility. Her feet burned against rough concrete, her elegant dress drawing strange looks from early morning commuters. Bruises from the guards' rough handling throbbed beneath the silk fabric. She had no phone, no money, no idea where to go. After what felt like hours, Mara found herself in an older part of the city. The polished high-rises gave way to weathered brick buildings and empty storefronts. Through her tears, she spotted a church, clearly abandoned, its stone facade crumbling at the edges. Stained glass windows, cracked and dusty, filtered the morning light into broken rainbows. The heavy wooden doors creaked as Mara pushed them open. Inside, the air hung still and musty. Rows of worn pews led to an altar draped in years of dust. Cobwebs stretched between tarnished candlesticks. Yet somehow the space still held an air of sanctuary. Mara's legs gave out as she reached the altar. She collapsed to her knees on the threadbare carpet, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. All the fear and grief she'd been holding back crashed over her like a wave. Fear for her daughter, for Declan, for herself. A half-melted candle sat in a brass holder on the altar. With trembling hands, Mara found an old book of matches nearby. The small flame sputtered to life, pushing back the shadows just slightly. God, she whispered, her voice rough from crying. I know I haven't talked to you much lately. Been too busy working, taking care of Grandma, just trying to survive. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. But I need you now. My baby needs you. Declan needs you." The candle flame danced as Mara continued praying, speaking from her heart. "I'm so scared, but I can't give up. I won't abandon my daughter to those people. And Declan—" Her voice caught. "He risked everything to help me. I can't leave him behind either." She fell silent, watching the flame flicker. The quiet of the church wrapped around her like a comforting embrace, helping her find center despite her exhaustion and fear. A floorboard creaked behind her. Mara whirled around, her heart leaping to her throat. A figure emerged from the shadows near the confessional, the young employee who had slipped her the note about the auction dates. The woman's hospital ID badge still hung from her wrinkled scrubs. "I followed you," the employee said softly, holding up her hands to show she meant no harm. "I've been trailing you since you escaped, making sure no one else was." Mara stayed tense, ready to run. "Why?" "Because I can't live with myself anymore." The woman's voice shook. "What they're doing, stealing babies, selling them like property, it's evil. I only took the job because I needed the money, but—" She wrapped her arms around herself. "I've seen too much, done too much." "What about Declan?" Mara asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Is he—" "He's alive." The employee moved closer, keeping her movements slow and careful. "They took him to a secure government building downtown. It's where they process all the special transfers before auction." Her face twisted with disgust at the euphemism. "The auction is tonight. They're moving everything up after what happened." Mara's hand found the altar behind her, steadying herself. "Tonight? But how can I possibly—" "I want to help," the employee interrupted. "I know the security protocols, the access codes. I can't make it right, but I can try to fix some of what I've done wrong." The candle's flame cast moving shadows across the altar as Mara considered. This woman had helped her once already with the note, and right now she had no one else to turn to. Mara pushed herself to her feet, drawing strength from her prayer and this unexpected ally. She wiped the last tears from her cheeks, squaring her shoulders. "I will not give up," she declared, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Not while my daughter is out there. Not while Declan needs help. Whatever it takes, I'm going to make this right." The morning sun broke through the cracked stained glass, painting the altar in shards of colored light. In that moment, Mara felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope, small but fierce, like the candle flame still burning beside her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them. The rising sun painted streaks of pink and gold across the city skyline as Mara and the traumatized employee hurried through narrow side streets. Their footsteps echoed off brick walls as they stuck to shadows, avoiding main roads where New Horizons security might be searching. "I know someone who might help us," Mara said between quick breaths, leading them through a maze of alleyways. "A retired police officer. He came into the clinic last year with chest pains, thought he was having a heart attack." The employee nodded, keeping pace despite her obvious exhaustion. "Can we trust him?" "I spent my whole lunch break sitting with him until the ambulance came," Mara explained. "Turned out to be anxiety, but he never forgot that kindness. He still sends Christmas cards to the clinic." They emerged onto a quiet residential street, lined with modest homes and well-tended gardens. Mara stopped in front of a small blue house with a pickup truck parked in the driveway. Her hand shook slightly as she pressed the doorbell. Harold Briggs opened the door, coffee mug in hand. His weathered face showed surprise at finding visitors so early. "Mara, what on earth? Officer Briggs, I need your help." Mara cut in, her voice cracking. "Please." Harold's expression shifted as he took in their desperate state. Mara's disheveled appearance, and the employee still in wrinkled scrubs. He stepped back, gesturing them inside. "Come on in, and it's just Harold now." In his small living room, decorated with police memorabilia and family photos, Mara quickly explained everything. The surrogacy scam, her stolen baby, Declan's capture, and the impending auction. Harold listened intently, his lined face growing increasingly grave. "Jesus," he muttered when she finished. Without hesitation, he set down his coffee mug. "Give me 15 minutes to get my gear." The employee blinked in surprise. "Just like that? You'll help us?" Harold's eyes softened as he looked at Mara. This young lady sat with me during one of the scariest moments of my life, held my hand, told me stories about her grandmother to keep me calm. He straightened his shoulders. "Besides, stopping criminals who steal babies? That's exactly the kind of case I joined the force to handle." He disappeared into his basement, returning with a worn bulletproof vest and a small duffel bag. "Still fits," he said, adjusting the straps. "And I've kept my security license current, helps with part-time work." The employee spread building blueprints across Harold's kitchen table. Her hands trembled as she marked access points and wrote down security codes. "The main holding cells are here," she explained, pointing. "They'll have Declan under heavy guard, but I know which doors have electronic locks I can override." Mara studied the plans, committing every detail to memory. Her fear remained, a constant knot in her stomach, but now it was tempered by determination. She thought of her daughter's tiny face, of Declan being tasered as he tried to help her. No more running, no more hiding. They spent hours planning, checking equipment, reviewing contingencies. Harold cleaned his old service weapon while sharing tactical advice. The employee detailed guard rotations and security protocols. Mara absorbed everything, asking questions, focusing on what needed to be done. As afternoon light faded to evening shadows, they loaded into Harold's pickup truck. The employee sat in the middle, clutching her ID badge. Mara took the passenger seat, her grandmother's rosary wrapped around her wrist. Harold drove steadily, his experienced hands sure on the wheel. They parked across from the transfer facility, a nondescript office building with tinted windows and multiple security cameras. In the growing darkness, they could see guards patrolling the perimeter. Inside, somewhere, was Declan, and soon the wealthy buyers would arrive for the auction. Harold switched off the engine. The sudden silence felt heavy with purpose. He turned to face Mara and the employee. "Last chance to back out. Once we start this, there's no turning back." Mara gripped her grandmother's rosary tighter, feeling the smooth wooden beads against her palm. She thought of her daughter, of Declan, of all the other stolen babies who needed help. Her voice was steady as she replied, "We're not backing out. Not now. Not ever." The three of them huddled closer, reviewing their plan one final time as darkness settled over the city. The facility's lights cast ominous shadows across their faces. But in Harold's old pickup truck, an unlikely team of heroes prepared to face whatever challenges awaited inside those walls. The streetlights cast long shadows as Harold adjusted his faded police jacket, squaring his shoulders with the confidence of his former profession. Though retired, he carried himself with the same authority that had marked his 30 years on the force. He led Mara and the employee toward the building's entrance, his weathered badge catching the dim light. "Evening," Harold called out to the security guard, his voice gruff but steady. "Got a tip about some suspicious activity. Need to check it out." He flashed his old credentials quickly, not giving the guard time to examine them closely. The young guard hesitated, glancing between Harold's authoritative stance and the two women behind him. Mara held her breath, trying to appear calm despite her racing heart. The employee kept her head down, her own ID badge partially visible. "I wasn't notified about any—" the guard began. "That's the point of a surprise inspection, isn't it?" Harold cut in, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Unless you'd prefer I call in the active duty officers, get the whole department involved?" The guard shifted uncomfortably, then stepped aside. "No, sir. That won't be necessary." They moved past him quickly, Mara's shoes clicking softly on the polished floor. The building's interior was eerily quiet, with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Some flickered, creating an unsettling strobe effect in the otherwise empty hallways. The employee whispered directions as they moved, her voice barely audible. "Left here, then 2 rights. The holding area is in the basement level." Their footsteps echoed as they descended a concrete stairwell. The air grew cooler, heavy with the musty smell of underground spaces. Mara's hands trembled, but she forced them still. Somewhere in this building, Declan was waiting. They emerged into a dimly lit corridor. A single guard sat at a desk, reading a magazine. Harold approached confidently, while Mara and the employee hung back in the shadows. "Need to interview one of your prisoners," Harold announced. "Got orders from above." Before the guard could properly react, Harold moved with surprising speed for his age. He shoved the younger man hard, sending him stumbling backward. The guard's head connected with the wall with a dull thud, and he slumped to the ground, unconscious. "Still got it," Harold muttered, quickly dragging the guard's body aside and taking his keys. The employee rushed forward to examine the electronic lock on the nearest door. Her fingers flew over the keypad, inputting codes she'd memorized. After several tense moments, the lock clicked open. Mara burst through the door first. The room was small and cold, lit by a single bare bulb. Declan sat chained to a metal chair, his head bowed. Dark bruises marked his face, and his usually immaculate suit was torn and dirty. "Declan!" Mara rushed to him, her hands gentle as she lifted his face. His eyes opened, focusing on her with effort. "Mara?" His voice was rough, disbelieving. "How did you—" "Shh," she soothed, examining his injuries. "We're getting you out of here." The employee worked quickly on his restraints, her hands steady despite the pressure. Each click of the locks releasing seemed thunderous in the small space. Harold stood guard at the door, watching the hallway with practiced vigilance. "The auction," Declan said urgently as the last chain fell away. "It starts in less than an hour. We have to—" "We know," Mara assured him, helping him to his feet. He swayed slightly, and she wrapped an arm around his waist to steady him. "Can you walk?" Declan nodded, though his face was pale with pain. "They didn't break anything important." He managed a weak smile. "Just bruised my ego a bit." Harold gestured them forward. "Back exit's this way. Got my truck waiting." They moved as quickly as Declan's condition allowed, retracing their steps through the shadowy corridors. The employee led them through service passages, avoiding the main areas where they might be spotted. Every footstep seemed to echo too loudly, every shadow potentially concealing a guard. At last, they reached a heavy metal door marked "Emergency Exit Only." The employee swiped her badge one final time, disabling the alarm. Cool night air rushed in as they pushed it open. Harold's pickup truck sat exactly where they'd left it, a dark shape against the city lights. They helped Declan into the back seat, Mara climbing in beside him. The employee took the passenger seat while Harold started the engine. As they pulled away from the building, Mara noticed Declan's hands were shaking. She took them in her own, trying to share what warmth she could. His skin was cold from the basement cell. "Thank you," he whispered, squeezing her fingers weakly. "I didn't think anyone would—" He broke off, emotion making his voice rough. "Of course we came," Mara said firmly. "We're in this together now." Harold navigated through the nighttime traffic with careful speed, heading toward the auction site. In the rearview mirror, his eyes were hard with determination. The employee sat rigid beside him, clutching her badge like a lifeline. The city lights blurred past as they drove, a kaleidoscope of neon and shadow. Declan's breathing gradually steadied, some color returning to his face. Though still clearly in pain, his eyes were sharp and focused. Whatever they would face at the auction, he was ready. Mara watched the streets rush by, her grandmother's rosary still wrapped around her wrist. They had rescued Declan against impossible odds. Now they just had to save her daughter and expose the entire operation. The task seemed overwhelming, but looking at the determined faces around her, she felt a surge of hope. They were no longer alone in this fight. The gleaming event hall rose before them like a fortress of glass and steel, its windows blazing with golden light against the dark sky. Security guards in black suits patrolled the perimeter, their earpieces glinting. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway, their drivers waiting patiently as elegantly dressed couples disappeared through the main entrance. Mara's heart pounded as Harold parked the truck in a shadowy corner of the service lot. Beside her, Declan straightened with visible effort, masking his pain behind determination. The employee, who had finally told them her name was Sarah, clutched her ID badge tightly. "Remember the plan," Declan said softly. "Sarah gets us in through the kitchen. I'll need 3 minutes to upload the files to their system. Mara, you focus on finding your daughter. Harold, I know my part." The retired officer nodded grimly. "Create a distraction if needed, and be ready for a quick exit." They moved quietly through the darkness toward a plain metal door marked Staff Only. Sarah's hands trembled as she swiped her card. The lock clicked open. The kitchen was a blur of activity, servers in crisp uniforms arranging delicate hors d'oeuvres on silver trays, bartenders stocking champagne. No one spared them a second glance as Sarah led them confidently through the controlled chaos. She'd clearly memorized the staff schedules and patterns. Through a set of swinging doors, they entered a carpeted hallway. The sounds of tinkling glasses and polite laughter drifted from the main hall. Declan pulled out his phone, fingers flying over the screen as he connected to the building's network. "Starting the upload now," he whispered. "Remember, when the screens change, that's your signal." Mara nodded, her throat tight. She followed Sarah toward another door, this one leading to an observation area overlooking the main auction floor. What she saw made her blood run cold. The space below was arranged like a theater, with tiered seating facing a raised stage. Well-dressed men and women sipped champagne while studying digital tablets. Auction catalogues? Mara realized with horror. Along one wall, a series of glass-walled rooms displayed infants in elaborate cribs, like products in a store window. Nurses in pristine uniforms moved between the displays, checking monitors and adjusting blankets. "There," Sarah breathed, pointing to a small figure being carried towards the stage. "That's your daughter." Mara's knees nearly buckled. The baby wore a tiny pink dress, her dark curls crowned with a bow. A number hung from her crib. J3. Like she was nothing more than merchandise. The auctioneer stepped up to the microphone, his voice smooth and practiced. "Ladies and gentlemen, our next offering is a healthy 3-month-old female. African-American descent, excellent genetic markers, all medical screenings clear. Opening bid starts at $750,000. Rage and desperation exploded in Mara's chest. Without thinking, she burst through the door and ran down the carpeted steps toward the stage. "Stop! That's my baby! She was stolen from me!" The room erupted in startled murmurs. Security guards moved toward her, but before they could reach her, every screen in the room flickered and changed. Suddenly, the elegant walls were filled with damning evidence, security footage of infants being taken from sobbing mothers, spreadsheets tracking illegal sales, recorded conversations discussing merchandise acquisition. The auctioneer's face went white. This is some sort of mistake. But more images appeared. Medical records showing stolen embryos, bank transfers to offshore accounts, emails discussing price points for different ethnicities. The wealthy crowd began to shift uneasily, some heading for the exits. Then Declan's voice boomed through the speakers, though he was nowhere to be seen. Ladies and gentlemen, you are all witnesses to, and participants in, a criminal human trafficking operation. Law enforcement has been monitoring this live stream and is on their way. I suggest you consider your options carefully. As if on cue, sirens began to wail in the distance. The elegant facade crumbled as panic took hold. People rushed towards the doors, abandoning their champagne glasses and tablets. Security guards looked uncertainly at each other, some dropping their weapons and fleeing. Mara took advantage of the chaos, sprinting up the steps to the stage where her daughter lay crying in her display crib. She scooped the baby up, tears streaming down her face as she finally held her child again. The tiny girl's cries softened as she nestled against her mother's chest, as if she knew she was finally safe. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows as police vehicles surrounded the building. The sound of boots thundered through the halls as tactical teams moved in, shouting orders. The auctioneer tried to run but was quickly tackled by 2 officers. More police poured in, securing exits and beginning to sort through the panicked crowd. Alarms blared overhead, their harsh sound mixing with shouts and running feet. But Mara barely noticed. She stood in the eye of the storm, rocking her daughter gently and whispering prayers of thanksgiving. After so many months of fear and pain, her baby was finally back in her arms. Through her tears, she saw Declan limping toward her, Sarah and Harold close behind. His face was lined with exhaustion, but his eyes shone with triumph as he looked at mother and child reunited. The chaos swirled around them as the raid continued. Officers collecting evidence, arresting key figures, documenting the scene. But in that moment, cradling her daughter while surrounded by the unlikely family who had helped save her, Mara felt nothing but pure joy. Her baby was safe. The truth was exposed. Justice was finally being served. The elegant auction hall transformed into a scene of controlled chaos as government agents flooded through every entrance. Their tactical gear and determined expressions stood in stark contrast to the crystal chandeliers and marble floors. Shouts of, "Federal agents! Everyone stay where you are!" echoed through the space. Mara pressed her daughter closer, the baby's warmth anchoring her as uniformed officers moved systematically through the crowd. Well-dressed buyers who moments ago had been bidding on children now sat stunned in their chairs, hands raised as agents collected their phones and tablets as evidence. Near the bar, the facilities director darted toward a hidden service door, shoving aside a waiter. 2 agents spotted him and gave chase. "Stop, federal agents." The director's expensive shoes slipped on the polished floor as he tried to change direction. An agent tackled him with practiced precision, the impact sending them both sliding across the marble. The director's protests were lost in the chaos as officers cuffed him and read him his rights. Through the commotion, Mara spotted another familiar face. Declan's former mentor being led toward the exit in handcuffs, his usual polished appearance disheveled. Declan pushed away from the paramedic trying to check his injuries and walked deliberately toward the man who had betrayed him. "How many?" Declan's voice was low but carried clearly. "How many lives did you help them steal?" The mentor's practiced smile flickered. "Declan, you don't understand the complexities." "No." Declan cut him off. "You're going to answer for every single one, every baby, every mother, every family you helped destroy for profit." His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I trusted you. I looked up to you, and you knew what they were doing the entire time." The mentor's facade cracked slightly, showing fear beneath. Before he could respond, agents pulled him away toward a waiting vehicle. Declan watched him go, his shoulders tight with barely contained emotion. A gentle touch on Mara's arm made her start. A female agent with kind eyes stood beside her. "Ma'am, I'm Agent Cooper. We need to get some information from you, but first, let's have the medical team check you and your daughter." Mara nodded, her arms aching from holding her baby so tightly. The agent led her to a quieter corner where paramedics had set up a temporary assessment area. As they checked the baby's vital signs, Agent Cooper sat with her notebook ready. "You're both under federal protection now," she assured Mara. "We've been building this case for months, but your evidence and testimony broke it wide open. Can you tell me exactly what happened when they took your daughter?" Mara's voice shook as she recounted everything: the initial contract, the birth, the cruel separation. The agent's pen moved steadily across the pages, documenting every detail. Through it all, Mara kept one hand on her daughter, as if afraid she might disappear again. Across the room, Declan was arguing with another paramedic, who was trying to examine the burns from the taser and the bruises from his captivity. "I'm fine," he insisted, his eyes constantly moving to check on Mara and the baby. "It can wait. Sir, you need medical attention." The paramedic persisted, holding up a blood pressure cuff. Declan finally submitted to a quick examination, though he kept shifting to maintain his line of sight to Mara. When the paramedic insisted he needed to go to the hospital for observation, Declan's jaw set stubbornly. "Not until I know they're safe." Agent Cooper overheard and approached him. "Mr. Royce, we have a protective detail assigned to Ms. Johnson and her daughter. They'll be completely secure. Please let the medical team do their job." Outside, emergency vehicle lights painted the night in alternating red and blue. Mara walked beside the ambulance where paramedics were finally convincing Declan to lie on a gurney. Despite his protests, the exhaustion and pain were evident in his face. As they prepared to load him in, Declan's hand reached out, brushing against Mara's. The touch was brief, but carried volumes of unspoken meaning. They were both drained, running on the last dregs of adrenaline, but their eyes held the same triumphant light. They had done it. They had exposed the truth and rescued not just one baby, but potentially dozens of others. "I'll be fine," Declan said softly. "Take care of our girl." Mara squeezed his hand once before letting go, tears threatening again at his use of "ah." Her daughter made a small sound against her chest, and Mara adjusted the blanket around her tiny form. After everything they'd been through, victory felt both exhausting and exhilarating. The paramedics loaded Declan into the ambulance as more police cars arrived to process the scene. Evidence teams moved through the building, documenting everything. Officers led out a steady stream of handcuffed employees and buyers, but Mara barely noticed any of it. She stood in the cool night air, her daughter safe in her arms at last, watching the ambulance's lights fade into the distance. Spring sunshine filtered through the tall windows of Declan's mountain lodge, casting warm patches across the rustic wooden floors. 2 weeks had passed since the dramatic night that brought down the trafficking ring, and the house had transformed from a temporary refuge into something that felt remarkably like home. Mrs. Ames's cheerful humming drifted from the kitchen, accompanied by the gentle clinks of teacups being arranged on a silver tray. The baby's soft coos and gurgles joined the melody, creating a peaceful symphony that filled every corner of the lodge. "There's my sweet girl," Mrs. Ames cooed, pausing in her work to tickle the baby's chin. The infant, nestled safely in a cushioned bassinet near the kitchen counter, responded with a toothless smile that made the older woman's eyes crinkle with joy. "You're getting prettier every day, just like your mama." Mara watched from the doorway, her heart swelling at the scene. The past 14 days had been a whirlwind of federal interviews, medical checkups, and legal proceedings. But here in the lodge, protected by both government agents and the endless stretch of pine-covered mountains, they had found peace. "The tea is almost ready, dear," Mrs. Ames said, noticing Mara. "And don't worry about a thing. This little angel and I are having a wonderful time together." Declan's voice carried from the living room where he was participating in another video testimony. Though still bearing fading bruises from his ordeal, he had thrown himself into the work of dismantling the trafficking network. His powerful statements, combined with the evidence they had gathered, were systematically exposing every layer of corruption. Mara moved to the window, gazing out at the serene lake view. Her own work with advocacy groups had begun to take shape, turning her traumatic experience into something meaningful. Just yesterday, she had spoken with 3 other mothers who had been deceived by similar schemes. Their tears of recognition, their relief at finding someone who understood, had confirmed that this was her calling. The sound of Declan ending his video call drew her attention. She found him in the living room, running a hand through his hair, a gesture she now recognized as a sign of emotional exhaustion. He looked up as she entered, his face softening immediately. "That's the last testimony for today," he said, standing carefully. His injuries were healing well, but certain movements still brought winces of pain. "The prosecutors say we're making remarkable progress. Several more facilities have been identified and shut down." "I heard from Agent Cooper this morning," Mara replied. "They've already rescued 15 more babies and located most of their mothers." She paused, emotion catching in her throat. "Some of those infants would have been sold this week if we hadn't stopped them." Declan crossed the room to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "You did that, Mara. Your courage made all of this possible." Mrs. Ames appeared with the tea tray, the baby now peacefully sleeping in her other arm. "Here we are," she announced softly, setting everything down before carefully transferring the infant to Mara's waiting arms. "I'll just be in the garden if you need anything." As the housekeeper slipped out, Mara settled onto the plush sofa, cradling her daughter. Declan sat beside them, his presence both comforting and somehow nerve-wracking. Over the past 2 weeks, something had been building between them, unspoken but undeniable. The afternoon sun painted everything in soft gold as they shared their tea in companionable silence. Finally, Declan set his cup down, his movements deliberate. "Mara," he began, his voice gentle but carrying an undertone of uncertainty she had never heard before. "I need to ask you something." She looked up, finding his eyes filled with an emotion that made her heart skip. He reached out slowly, letting the baby grab his finger in her sleep, a gesture that had become familiar and precious. "I know you're planning to move back to your own place soon," he continued. "And I completely understand if that's what you want, but—" He took a deep breath. "I was hoping you might consider letting me remain in her life. In both your lives." Mara's breath caught as he hurried to explain. "Not as any kind of replacement father. That's not what I'm suggesting. But I love her." His voice grew hoarse. "And I love you. I think I have since that first day when you showed such incredible strength, even in your darkest moment." Tears welled in Mara's eyes as understanding washed over her. Looking at him, this powerful man who had risked everything to help her, who had shown such tenderness with her daughter, she saw the truth that had been growing all along. "Declan," she said softly, "you didn't save us because you wanted a family." She reached out, touching his cheek where a fading bruise still marked his skin. "You saved us because you already loved us." His eyes glistened as he nodded, unable to speak. The baby stirred between them, her tiny fingers still firmly gripped around Declan's larger one, as if she had no intention of ever letting go. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they moved to the wide porch that wrapped around the lodge. The mountain air was crisp with early spring, carrying the scent of pine and new growth. Mara settled into one of the comfortable chairs, Declan beside her, while their daughter slept peacefully in her arms. The sky painted itself in brilliant streaks of pink and gold, reflecting off the still surface of the lake below. But Mara barely noticed the spectacular sunset. Her attention was focused on the miracle of this moment, her daughter safe in her arms, Declan's steady presence beside her, and the overwhelming sense that after everything they had endured, they had finally found their way home. This wasn't an ending they could have planned or imagined. It was better. It was the family God had intended for them all along, brought together through trial and triumph, stronger for having fought their way to each other. 3 months later, golden sunlight spilled across the lodge's wraparound porch as Mara gently rocked her daughter in the morning warmth. The wooden swing creaked softly, a soothing rhythm that matched her daughter's peaceful breathing. The air carried the sweet scent of mountain wildflowers and fresh-baked bread from the kitchen. Through the open windows, Mrs. Ames's gentle humming drifted out along with the clatter of breakfast preparations. The sounds brought a smile to Mara's face, so different from the tense silence that had filled her life just months ago. Now, baby giggles and quiet conversations echoed through the lodge's halls, bringing healing to spaces that had once felt hollow. The screen door squeaked as Declan stepped out, carrying a stack of mail. His face was relaxed. The stress lines that had marked their early days together now softened. He settled beside them on the porch swing, careful not to disturb its gentle motion. "Look at this," he said softly, holding up an official-looking envelope. The final paperwork confirming New Horizons' complete shutdown. Every facility, every shell company, everything. Mara's heart lifted as she read through the document. "It's really over," she whispered. Declan pulled out several more letters, handwritten notes from women across the country. "These came for you," he said, passing them to her. With her daughter settled against her chest, Mara read through tearful messages of gratitude. Women thanking her for speaking out, for showing them they weren't alone, for giving them courage to seek justice. Each word reinforced that their painful journey had served a greater purpose. "I never imagined this kind of peace was possible," Mara admitted, looking out over the sunlit lake. "When I was at my lowest, praying in that empty church, it felt like everything was lost. But God had a bigger plan all along." "Speaking of plans," Declan said, his voice warming with excitement, "I want to show you something." He pulled out a set of blueprints, spreading them across their laps. "Remember the unused guest wing? I've been working with architects to convert it into a retreat center." Mara studied the drawings as he explained his vision. Private suites for temporary housing, counseling rooms, a library of legal resources, communal spaces for healing and connection. A safe haven for women recovering from exploitative surrogacy experiences. "I want you to help lead it," he said. "These women need someone who truly understands their journey. Someone who can show them there's hope on the other side of trauma." Tears welled in Mara's eyes as she imagined the space filled with women finding their strength again, turning their painful stories into powerful testimony. "It's perfect," she whispered. They spent the next hour discussing logistics, how to structure support programs, which experts to bring in, ways to ensure every woman felt safe and valued. Their daughter woke during their planning, stretching and yawning against Mara's shoulder. Declan reached for her with a gentle smile. "Come here, sweetheart." He lifted her high above his head, earning delighted giggles that carried across the porch like music. The sound seemed to embody everything they'd fought for: joy, freedom, and the promise of better days ahead. As evening approached, Mrs. Ames brought dinner out to the porch, a simple meal of grilled chicken, fresh vegetables, and warm bread. They gathered around the outdoor table, watching the sun paint the lake in shades of rose and gold. Fireflies began to emerge, dotting the grass with tiny lights. Mara bowed her head, whispering a prayer of gratitude for deliverance from darkness, for renewal of spirit, for the unexpected family God had woven together from broken threads. As she spoke the final Amen, Declan's arm slipped around her shoulders. He didn't rush to fill the silence or push for more. He simply shared in her moment of perfect contentment. The sky deepened to purple as night settled over the mountains. Stars emerged one by one, mirroring the fireflies below. Mara felt none of the fear that had once clouded her view of the future. Instead, she felt ready, eager, even, to build something beautiful from the ashes of their past. Together, they gathered their dishes and headed inside, a family united by more than circumstance. Each step felt like a movement toward purpose, toward healing, toward a future shaped by courage, compassion, and love strong enough to mend what once was broken. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.